Hi, it's Nikki here from Happy Hormones for Life. And today I've got a really, really special guest, longtime friend, but also a qualified naturopath and with over 20 years experience, Louise,
Yeah.
in the functional medicine field. Louise has had her own clinical practice in Queensland. She's Australian, before working for industry-leading clinical healthcare companies, both over there and back in the UK. And she's also a director at Invivo Healthcare, a company specializing in the human microbiome and the lab we use for all of our stool tests, and more recently, tests that look into oral and the vaginal microbiome as well. They really are at the forefront of this topic. So welcome, Louise. Louise
Thank you.
Joyce, by the way, I didn't even say your name. I'm so super excited to have you here because we have so much to talk about the gut and the microbiome. So first of all, I just want to ask you, how on earth did you end up an expert in this area on microbes, gut health, and all of that?
How did I become an expert? Well, I guess it goes back to when I really started training as a naturopath. And in naturopathic training, it's all about interconnectedness. We're never looking at a system in isolation to another. And so often it just kept coming back that gut, gut, gut. And within the gut, we start looking at microbes and how in which these microbes really govern a lot of our functions and outcomes. And I can remember even lecturers saying to me, look, when in doubt, just go to the gut. And I thought, gosh, that sounds a little bit, naive. But realistically, when we come and focus on this centralized system, it does have massive cascading effects. And so it piqued my interest then. And I guess I've evolved that learning as much as the science has evolved as well. What we knew a year ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago is on this massive kind of exponential growth in terms of the science meeting the clinical kind of interventions, and then what people are learning in mainstream media.
It is incredible, the advances in this area, isn't it? I think that's why the doctors are finding it so difficult to keep up with the science, and why we have specialists like you having to pick up the pieces a lot of the time. So tell us a little bit of why gut health is so important, and particularly for women as we get older.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, we've got this incredible digestive system, from kind of mouth to anus that connects us to the rest of the world. And it's this small lining, realistically, half the width of a human hair. So it's tiny. And this membrane is, beautifully engineered, but it's this membrane that connects us with the rest of the world. And you might think, well, that seems quite under-engineered for something to be so critical, yet so small. But if we think about why it's so small, it is because we want that interconnectedness, and we need to be taking on macro and micronutrients. And behind that as well functions our immune system. But yet, that is assimilating all of these important components for our body. So how can we think of it in isolation to that in terms of hormonal health? Because if we think about it, things like serotonin is manufactured in our gut. So for those of you that don't understand, that kind of helps us to go towards our brain health, our neurotransmitters. It can impact sleep health with melatonin. Also things like thyroid health is impacted, metabolic syndrome. So a lot of our female hormones, things like estrogen, actually help to be metabolized, modulated, and excreted if they are in excess as well. So it all comes back to this centralized system. So I don't feel like I'm answering your question properly, but it's such a huge question. How is the gut involved in hormonal health? There's so many aspects. I don't know if there's anything you want to unpick.
Yeah, I'm really interested in why we tend to get flare-ups of digestive issues that we may have been prone to when we were younger, and we've sort of cope with them through adulthood, and then perimenopause, that we hit 40, and then they seem to flare up during these times. And I wonder if you have a sort of a reason for that in your mind as what's going on with the gut.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lifetime of kind of luggage with us, baggage by that time. So digestive processes may have been affected by things like excessive cortisol, quite topical at the moment, but who hasn't been stressed in 2020 or the years prior to that? And these things can kind of wear systems down. And by wearing systems down, it might mean that we're more prone to maybe flaring to things that we potentially haven't done so in the past. So just that little bit of compromising that puts us on that seesaw of like, we might be able to balance it before, but it might just be tipping over the edge. But also outside of cortisol, you know, we've got this complex dance of hormones that are happening typically within that lifestyle kind of age, you know, and sometimes in excess and sometimes in decline. And so the body is again trying to work with those. And if our microbiome is, you know, dysbiotic or out of balance, it may not have an ability to cope with those. And again, the cup might overflow, to use more analogies from seesaws. So it's just, you know, sometimes it's all of the things that we did in the past. Sometimes it is that in combination with the changes in hormones. Could also be lifestyle changes. So many of us get to that age group and we think, gosh, I need to actually start doing some self-care. Maybe I've been a little bit traumatic to myself in the past. And so we start thinking about what do we need to do in terms of modulating our diet. And so health optimization can also be kind of a landmark for us becoming more self-aware about signs and symptoms.
So who would benefit from doing a stool test, the kind of stool test that you do?
Okay, so we do quite a specific type of test, a little bit different to what you're going to be coming across in, say, working alongside your general healthcare practitioner, your medical doctor. We look at host markers. These markers really help us to understand what's happening from an inflammatory, immune, and also membrane perspective. Like what I was saying before, with that kind of half the hair width, you know, what's happening within the quality of that system.
And when you say membrane, you're talking about the gut lining, aren't you? Which is so critical to gut health, isn't it?
Absolutely. So if we think about it, sometimes we think about it in terms of a pair of leggings, you know, we don't want it to be full of holes. We don't want it to be massively permeable. We want it to be there to enable things to cross through. And, you know, that's how we are absorbing nutrients and many other things, but we want that quality to be retained. And so there are different markers that we can look at, but there's also different patterns of microbes that can help us understand the health of that barrier function, or potentially maybe patterns that are causing disruption to that membrane as well. So the rest of our panel really opens up into microbial patterns, parasitology, fungal markers, etc. But it's really looking at chronic disease markers, things like IBS, IBD, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but also health optimization.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you was about the gut-brain axis, the gut-brain link, and the link between your gut health and your mental health. Can you just talk a little bit about the sort of symptoms we might get if the gut is sending the wrong messages to the brain?
Yeah, the big ones, you know, things like anxiety, depression, mood swings, brain fog. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating. We're starting to, you know, we're not starting to, for a few years now, been really renaming some probiotics, things like psychobiotics. So the fact that they actually have an ability to work on this gut brain kind of modulation. And that's fascinating. And that's where, you know, working with someone like yourself, you can really dig down and find out the specifics, you know, do a test. What are the patterns? What do I need to encourage with diet and lifestyle, or potentially a supplement to modulate that? It's just, yeah, really curious. But also a little take home is like vagal tone. We've got this fantastic kind of structural connection between our gut and our brain, right? And so that's why we're like, oh my gosh, it's a gut feeling. That saying is around for a very specific reason. And one of the most simplest things, and I think it's really great at this time in kind of global pandemic that people can do, is sing. Your neighbors might not enjoy it. Your partner might not enjoy it. The kids, the cat, the dog.
I would not enjoy it.
But, you know, singing actually is really good for toning this vagal tone. So I say to people,
nerve, yeah, the vagus nerve, how it works.
Yeah.
Singing, really? How does that work even?
It's just by actually stimulating it. Some other things you can do is things like gargling as well. But, you know, if you think about that diaphragm and all, you know, it's this whole feedback system. So I say, like, for anyone listening, go and think of your 3 favorite belter songs and download them and try and do it, you know, a couple of times throughout the week and just see how you feel.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, Louise. I'm in awe of your work and your knowledge, and we love working with you. And I think if anybody's interested in looking into their gut health for whatever reason, whether you've got digestive issues or systemic issues that are just unresolved, do message me and we can talk through whether we can help at all. So thank you so much again, Louise. Really good to see you. and have a great rest of the week.
You too. Thanks.